The clock strikes midnight, the sound echoing through a stillness that only exists once every 33 years. There's a brief moment where the air feels thick, almost heavy with anticipation, as if the very fabric of reality pauses, holding its breath. It's not just another night, it's the night everything resets. People know this sensation well, it marks the beginning of the next cycle. And as the clock tower's final chime fades into silence, the world shifts ever so slightly. Time restarts, again. This isn't the first time this has happened, and for everyone living in this world, it won't be the last. Every 33 years, like clockwork, time loops. It's a cycle, an endless repetition, but what sets it apart from other tales of time travel is that the people remember. Every single person carries the weight of their past lives. Each one knows exactly what they've done before, where they've failed, where they've succeeded. What's more, they live it all with three versions of themselves. A younger self, 33 years behind, and an older self, 33 years ahead. It's not just memories they have to contend with, it's the physical, undeniable presence of their own past and future. The world has adapted, though not without struggle. To live among yourself is both a blessing and a curse. Imagine knowing what mistakes you're going to make because your older self stands before you, a living testament to your choices. And behind you, a younger self, filled with the naive hopes and dreams that seem so distant now. Some people embrace it, use it as an opportunity to better themselves, to correct old mistakes before they're made. Others, though, fall apart under the constant weight of self-judgment, of seeing the exact person they used to be and knowing where it all went wrong. But here's where it gets interesting. This cycle, this eternal loop, isn't just about repeating the same 33 years. People can't avoid it, can't stop it. No matter what they try, when that clock strikes midnight at the end of every 33 years, the loop resets, and they are forced to meet themselves all over again. What changes each time isn't the world, it's them. And this time, things are about to change in ways no one has ever expected. The protagonist, standing alone on the street beneath that clock tower, feels the shift deep within their bones. It's been a long time since they first learned about the cycle, and now they are in the heart of it. They know that in a few short days, they'll meet their younger self and their older self once again, a reunion that always brings mixed feelings. There's something strange about this moment, though. Something different. They can't quite place it, but this time, the air feels heavier, the silence louder, as though the universe is whispering of something to come. They've done this before, many times, in fact. The 33-year cycle has become both a curse and a comfort, familiar yet suffocating. The protagonist knows what's coming. They'll look into the eyes of their younger self, full of hope and ambition, yet unaware of the burdens ahead. And then, they'll face their older self, weary and wise, shaped by years that the current self hasn't yet endured. It's a cycle that forces them to confront not just the inevitability of time but their own shortcomings, regrets, and victories. The protagonist feels the tug of memories, the weight of past failures, the unease of facing the future in the form of their older self. They've tried, in each cycle, to change things, but every choice seems to lead to the same outcomes. Society has its way of dealing with this phenomenon. Some people thrive, relishing the opportunity to live multiple lives in one, using their older selves as guides and their younger selves as beacons of lost hope. Others crumble, overwhelmed by the constant reflection of themselves, three versions of a life lived, some pieces cherished, others regretted. People have learned to both fear and anticipate these meetings. It's hard to hide from your own past or your own future when it stands before you, demanding acknowledgement. For the protagonist, the past cycles have brought moments of bitter reflection and cautious hope. They've seen their younger self fail at dreams they once held so dearly. They've met their older self, wise yet worn down by the years of hard decisions and inevitable losses. But this time, there's something in the air. As they stand beneath the clock tower, that sense of repetition feels different. This cycle doesn't feel like the others. There's a tension here, an unease that gnaws at the protagonist's mind, whispering that something is about to go wrong, or perhaps, finally, go right. This cycle, the protagonist senses, is going to be unlike the others. Something new is coming. Something that might just disrupt the entire system. But they don't know what it is yet, only that this feeling of change is undeniable. And as the night deepens and the first day of the new cycle dawns, they brace themselves for whatever comes next. The moment the protagonist sees their younger self, it feels like looking through a time-warped mirror. 33 years separate them, yet the face staring back is so familiar, untouched by the world's hard edges. That younger version stands taller, more upright, brimming with ambition. Their eyes sparkle with an optimism that the protagonist can barely remember feeling, that sense of invincibility before life happens, before all the small disappointments and large failures settle in. The younger self is eager, with a voice that's filled with excitement. They speak with certainty about plans, dreams of what the future holds. It's all so painfully naive. The protagonist listens to this version of themselves talk about success as if it's guaranteed, as if the world will bow to their ambition. They talk about love, still believing in forever, not yet aware of the heartbreaks ahead. The younger self is full of hope, with no concept of how those hopes will be reshaped into something else, something far less shiny. There's a part of the protagonist that envies this younger version, that misses the clarity of being so sure of where the path would lead. But more than envy, there's a deep ache, a knowing that their younger self has no idea what's coming. They want to warn them, to give them advice, but they know it's pointless. Every time they've tried, it hasn't changed a thing. The younger self has to live through it, just as they did. And so, the protagonist holds their tongue, watching silently as their younger self eagerly lists out all the things they'll achieve, oblivious to the reality waiting around the corner. Then, the meeting with the older self. It's more of a confrontation than a meeting, really. The older self is there, weathered and tired, a stark contrast to the youthful energy of the younger version. Their face is etched with lines, the kind you earn from years of struggling with decisions, from battles won and lost, from carrying the weight of experiences that the present self hasn't yet lived. The older self looks at the protagonist with an unsettling calm, the kind of calm that comes from knowing too much. Their words are measured, deliberate, and laced with a cynicism that the protagonist immediately recognizes as their own future. The older self no longer talks about dreams the way the younger self does. They talk about consequences, about compromise, about how things don't always turn out the way you imagine. It's clear that the older self has given up on some of the ideals the present version still holds on to. They scoff at the enthusiasm the younger self had, and their disillusionment hits the protagonist like a punch. The older self tells them about choices they will have to make, decisions that won't sit well, and the compromises that will define their future. They talk about the cost of ambition, the toll it takes on relationships, and the way life forces people to let go of things they thought they'd never lose. The protagonist listens in a mix of horror and resignation, recognizing the truth in those words. They see their future self as both a warning and an inevitability, a version of themselves they can't fully escape. Now, standing between the two, the protagonist feels the weight of it all. On one side, there's the younger version, so full of hope and promise, representing everything they once believed they could be. On the other, the older version, tired and jaded, embodying everything they are afraid they'll become. It's impossible not to feel torn. The younger self looks at them with wide eyes, expecting the protagonist to confirm that their dreams will come true. The older self shakes their head, as if to say none of it really matters in the end. And the protagonist? They are stuck between these two selves, unable to fully agree with either of them. There's so much the younger self doesn't know, about the pain, the losses, the compromises they'll make. But there's also something in the older self that feels wrong, too. Have they really become that cynical, that willing to let go of everything they once cared about? The internal struggle is relentless. The protagonist knows they are the sum of these two selves, but reconciling the person they were with the person they will become feels like an impossible task. Society, as it always does, has found ways to adapt to the strange reality of living alongside different versions of oneself. Over time, rules have emerged, some spoken, others unspoken. Families in particular have created their own rituals to handle the cycle. In some households, it's seen as a gift, a way to mentor younger selves or receive guidance from older ones. Parents can sit with their younger selves, sharing advice that they know will only be half heard, but they do it anyway, because it feels like a second chance. Some even celebrate the meeting, marking the day as a kind of family reunion across generations. But not everyone thrives in such an environment. For every family that embraces the loop, there are others who crumble under the weight of it. Some people can't handle seeing the person they used to be, or worse, the person they will become. The gap between what they hoped for and what they've achieved is too vast, too painful. Divorce rates are higher after the loop resets. Siblings fall out of contact. The knowledge of what's coming can breed apathy or anxiety, depending on how a person handles it. Communities, too, have developed customs to navigate these challenges. Entire cities have policies in place to help manage the transition when the cycle restarts. There are support groups for people who can't cope with seeing their older or younger selves. Some places have even developed a kind of code of conduct for interacting with your other selves, how to handle disagreements, how to deal with the inevitable sense of disappointment or pride when looking into your own past or future. There's even a word for it: tri-meetings, the rare moments when all three selves are together, trying to make sense of what it means to exist in multiple stages at once. On the scientific front, humanity has not stood idly by. For years, researchers have studied the time loop, trying to understand its cause and, perhaps more importantly, how to break free from it. Theories abound. Some say it's a glitch in the universe, others believe it's a natural phenomenon like the turning of the seasons. What scientists have discovered, though, is that the loop isn't merely a quirk of time, it's tied to something deeper, something fundamental about human existence. It's as if the universe itself demands this repetition, as though there's something humans are meant to learn, or perhaps overcome, by living in cycles. Some have tried to exploit the loop for technological advancements. With the knowledge of what's to come, companies can fast-track innovations. An inventor may spend one cycle working on a project, only to refine it with insights from their older self in the next. It's led to bursts of progress in some areas, but stagnation in others. Why push too hard and you know you'll get another chance to fix your mistakes? There's a laziness that comes with the certainty of another cycle. The urgency of progress has dulled, replaced with a methodical, almost plodding pace of discovery. Despite these advancements, the personal toll of living within the loop is undeniable. Relationships often falter under the strain. People grow tired of themselves, literally. How do you maintain a marriage, for example, when you're always comparing your partner to the person they were 33 years ago, or to the person they'll be 33 years from now? It's not uncommon for people to lose sight of who they really are, lost between the idealized version of themselves they once believed in and the disillusioned version they fear they'll become. Careers, too, suffer from the weight of the loop. Ambition doesn't carry the same fire, and you know that any mistakes you make can be corrected in the next cycle. Some people lose their drive entirely, content to coast through life knowing they'll get another shot. Others push too hard, desperate to achieve something monumental before the next reset. The balance is delicate, and few manage to find it. There are those who thrive, though, people who use the loop to perfect themselves. They see each cycle as an opportunity, not a burden. These individuals tend to be the outliers, the ones who have learned to accept both their past and future selves. But they are rare. For most, the weight of living with multiple versions of oneself proves too much, a burden that's impossible to escape. The cycle was supposed to reset, just like it always did. But as the 33rd year draws to a close, something feels off. The air doesn't have that familiar charge, the heaviness that signals the end of one loop and the start of another. There's no clock tower chime, no shifting of time. Instead, everything remains unervingly still. The protagonist waits, expecting the usual sensation of the reset, but nothing happens. It's as if the world has stalled. The younger and older selves are still there, but something has changed. Time should have reset by now. Everyone should be waking up to the beginning of the new cycle. Instead, they're all stuck, frozen in the same reality. At first, the protagonist doesn't believe it. Maybe it's a glitch, something that will correct itself soon. But then whispers begin to spread, others have noticed it too. People are realizing that this isn't just a delay. The cycle isn't resetting at all. Some start to panic, sensing that something irreversible has happened. The anomaly feels like the beginning of a breakdown, not just of time itself, but of everything they've come to rely on. The protagonist looks at their older self, expecting some kind of wisdom, but even they seem shaken. The world that has been so predictable, so controlled, is suddenly slipping into chaos. Word spreads quickly. People aren't meeting their younger or older selves as expected. Entire generations are missing. Some individuals have failed to appear entirely, while others find themselves caught in limbo, unsure whether they're in the past, present, or future. It's as though the system that has governed their lives is crumbling. The streets are filled with confusion. Some people cling to the hope that the cycle will resume, that this is just a blip, while others see this as their chance. Perhaps they can finally break free from the loop that's kept them in a perpetual state of repetition. The chaos intensifies. Without the reset, society begins to unravel. People have built their lives around the certainty of the cycle. Without it, there are no rules, no guidelines for what comes next. Some celebrate, eager to live a life free from the burden of their past and future selves, while others descend into despair, terrified of what an open future might mean. The predictability that once brought comfort is now replaced by an uncertain, untamed reality. For the first time in generations, people must face the unknown. The protagonist finds themselves caught in the middle of this turmoil. They've spent their life under the assumption that the cycle would always reset, that they'd always have another chance to fix mistakes or achieve what they hadn't before. Now, standing on the edge of this unprecedented disruption, they don't know whether to embrace it or fear it. Should they try to fix the cycle, or let it unravel completely? The younger self is excited. To them, this is a new beginning, a chance to break free from the inevitable disappointments they've yet to experience. They're filled with hope, convinced that whatever comes next will be better than the endless repetition of before. They talk about the possibilities of a life without the reset, a life where mistakes don't haunt you because there's no longer the pressure of another version of yourself watching, waiting to judge. But the older self is more cautious. They warn against the chaos that could follow. They've lived long enough to know that change isn't always good. The cycle, as frustrating as it could be, provided stability, a structure that kept society functioning. Without it, they argue, the world could descend into madness. People aren't ready for true freedom, especially those who have grown dependent on the loop. The older self speaks with the weariness of someone who has seen too much and knows the dangers of abandoning the familiar for the unknown. The protagonist feels torn, pulled between two conflicting desires. The younger self's optimism is infectious. There's a certain thrill in imagining a life unbound by the constraints of the cycle. But the older self's caution can't be ignored. What if the unraveling of the loop leads to something worse than the repetition they've always known? What if breaking free means losing everything they've come to understand about the world? They stand at a crossroads, weighing their options. To cling to the safety of the cycle would mean returning to a life of repetition, but at least it's a life they know how to navigate. To embrace the disruption, however, would be to risk everything for a future that no one can predict. The conflicting voices of their younger and older selves swirl in their mind, each offering compelling reasons to choose one path over the other. In the end, the choice is theirs alone. The protagonist must decide whether to fight for the order they've always known, or to let the cycle break, embracing whatever comes next, even if it means stepping into an entirely uncertain future. The protagonist stands between their younger and older selves, feeling the weight of the moment. Both versions of themselves have been arguing, pushing, and pulling the protagonist toward opposite paths. The younger self, wide-eyed and hopeful, is insistent. This is our chance. We've always wanted freedom, a life that doesn't repeat every 33 years. Think about it, a future where every choice matters, where there's no reset, no second chances but also no limits. On the other side, the older self speaks with caution and weariness. I've lived through what you haven't yet. You think freedom from the loop will solve everything, but it's not that simple. Without the structure of the cycle, people will lose their way. Society will collapse under the weight of uncertainty. I've seen what happens when people get too much freedom, they destroy themselves. The loop, for all its faults, keeps us grounded. The protagonist feels the tension between these two extremes, knowing that their decision will define not just their future, but the fate of everyone caught in the loop. The younger self's optimism is infectious, full of the dreams the protagonist once had. But there's truth in the older self's words too, a hard-won wisdom that understands the fragility of society and the dangers of disruption. You've always been afraid, the younger self accuses, looking at the older self with disdain. You've let fear hold you back. But we're not meant to be trapped in this cycle forever. We deserve a life that's real, that moves forward. The older self sighs, eyes heavy with experience. And you've always been too eager, too blind to the consequences of your actions. The loop isn't perfect, but it's kept humanity alive. Without it, chaos will follow. You think you're ready for that? The protagonist realizes they are not just deciding for themselves. They're deciding for the countless lives intertwined with theirs, for the people who rely on the loop as much as those who resent it. It's a decision that can't be taken lightly. Finally, they speak, silencing both their younger and older selves. I'm not the person I used to be, they say, looking at their younger self. And I'm not the person I'll become either, they add, turning to their older self. I'm something in between, and it's my choice now. The protagonist's mind races through the implications, the risks, and the rewards of both options. The future without the loop could mean freedom, but also uncertainty and potential disaster. Letting the loop continue could ensure stability, but at the cost of true progress and growth. In the end, the decision comes not from fear or eagerness, but from a deep, unshakable belief in humanity's resilience. We've survived the loop for centuries. We've lived through repetition, through the pain of seeing ourselves reflected back at every turn. But we've adapted, and will adapt again. This time, we won't be bound by the loop. The younger self smiles, finally sensing victory, while the older self looks on with quiet acceptance. The protagonist knows that this choice is a leap into the unknown, but it's a leap they are willing to take, not just for themselves, but for everyone. The loop doesn't define them. The cycle of repetition, while familiar and safe, has limited humanity's potential for too long. It's time to move forward, to embrace the uncertainty and risk of a future where every moment matters. As the world begins to shift, the protagonist feels the weight of their choice settle in. The streets, once chaotic, begin to calm as others sense the change. There's no reset, no going back. For the first time in generations, they are truly free to shape their own path without the constraints of the loop. In the silence that follows, the protagonist reflects on what this all means. Humanity has always thrived under pressure, has always found ways to adapt even in the face of overwhelming odds. They've lived through the endless repetition of time, but now, they'll live for something more, something uncertain, yes, but real. Looking toward the horizon, the protagonist feels a strange mix of fear and hope. The future is no longer set, no longer a predictable loop of 33-year cycles. It's open, wild, and full of possibilities. And that's exactly why they know humanity will survive. Because in the end, it's not the loop that made them strong, it's the will to break free from it. As they walk forward into this new, uncharted world, the protagonist smiles, knowing that whatever comes next, humanity will face it with the same defiance and resilience that has carried them through every challenge before. They are ready.